Welcome back to the New York Times Close-Up. I'm Sam Roberts. We're joined by Charles J. Hynes, the Brooklyn District Attorney, and my New York Times colleague Eric Ekholm to talk about prisoner re-entry programs, a story that Eric had in the Times not long ago. One of those programs in Brooklyn, run by Joe Hynes, was praised in a New York Times editorial. Joe, how does that work and what impact has it had? It's been in effect for nearly a decade. Can you point to any positive results?
It's a parole-mandated program, so folks coming back from prison who came from Brooklyn and will typically go back to Brooklyn are required to come to our program, this reentry site, within 2 weeks of release. It has had a measurable effect a positive effect on public safety. 6 out of 10 of these folks go back to prison within 3 years.
Ordinarily.
Yes, and typically they do it by reoffending. According to Professor Bruce Weston, who released a report about the program back in February, we reduced recidivism by more than half, so it's down to like 2.5 out of 10 rather than 6 out of 10. And that's, again, it impacts directly on public safety. This year, all right, we're at nearly 15% reduction in murder rates as compared to almost 7% increase in the rest of the city. And I think that part of that is impacted by the success of this program.
Eric, your story in the Times pointed out that this is the legacy of longer sentences, the legacy of more concern about punishment rather than rehabilitation. How does Joe Hynes' program in Brooklyn fit in with what you saw in the rest of the country?
Well, Brooklyn has had one of the earliest and probably best programs of this type, but it is an idea that's taking hold throughout the country. It's been quite remarkable. It's been very bipartisan. Right-wing Christian senators have been leading the way, as well as liberals, and it's in part because it makes economic sense. You can't just keep building more prisons. And as a legacy of that past, we have 700,000 people every year coming out of prison.
And about 4,000 of them, Joe, you say, wind up going back to Brooklyn.
And most of them, a lot of them don't even have a high school degree. They've never really had a real job. Many of them have drug and alcohol problems. So if, you know, in the old days you give them $5 and leave them on a street corner, what do you expect to happen? Yes. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone realizes that, you know, we have to try our best to give these people a chance. But often there are not the resources there, drug treatment facilities or good jobs for people with such poor educations. I think that's one of the biggest problems.
So it's not a question of bleeding hearts or compassion necessarily. It's a question of, you know, I guess the purest of motivations, if you want to be cynical about it, self-interest, that we can't afford to build more prisons and we don't want these people committing more crimes.
Exactly. And once people understand that this is not a special deal for the formerly incarcerated. I did not go to the prisons across New York State and say, I have a program for you, you and you, come on with me. You've come to Brooklyn. And unless I engage you, typically you're going to get yourself rearrested and more likely for a serious felony. You know, drug treatment as an alternative to prison, as you know, I've had for almost 19 years. And what has happened in New York is the program has been embraced by 22 other prosecutors. All 62 of our prosecutors in New York State would have a residential drug treatment program, but for the fact there's no funding. You know, we also have 200 drug courts in New York State. You know, we have the largest one in Brooklyn. And I think, as Eric mentioned, I think there's an acceptability by people on both sides of the philosophical issue that the burdening cost of prisons is detracting from so many other positive programs necessary that we've got to do something about prisoner reentry.
Let me ask both of you, what is the biggest obstacle in keeping people out of prison once they come back?
Well, I would say, first of all, money for the kinds of social programs, housing, drug treatment, getting education, getting training for a job that will pay a livable wage. That would have to be the biggest single problem.
None of these guys on the way home from prison have a plan to get back to prison. They all show up believing that they're never going to go to prison again, and yet they don't have a job of any substance. They don't have much family support. They don't have much hope, and they're out there on their own. So if you don't have a structure, if you don't engage them and give them wraparound services, they will predictably reoffend in a very, very short time. The highest percentage of reoffending is that first year, maybe as high as 35%. So to me, there's no there's no alternative as the chief prosecutor of the county, but to engage them will allow them to come back and get themselves in trouble. So this is about protecting the citizens I represent.
And that ComALERT program keeps expanding year after year
Yes,
to be able to take care of more of those 4,000.
We'll have 1,200 this year. That's up from 200 when we first started it.
Let me ask you about triple homicide. Your book that came out earlier last year, I guess now it is out in paperback. A book that is a great summer read if anyone is going to the beach. Also, Nelson DeMille has a new book coming out called Gatehouse.
Yes.
And how does Joe Hynes get into that book?
Well, very flattering. He mentioned in passing with a dialogue of a mafia don and the principal character, John Whitman Sutter. Sutter's asked, what do your kids do? And he said, well, my daughter works as an ADA in Brooklyn, and the mob guy says, for Joe Hynes, and he then says that Hynes is known as Charles J. Hynes, except to his friends Joe. So it was very flattering.
And he also refers to you as the legendary Charles J. Hynes.
I keep asking him to stop doing that because it's age-related. But I'll tell you, this book is extraordinary. It really reminds me of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby.
Sure, you're not supposed to plug someone else's
No,
book.
It's a great book. It really is. I'm going to show it.
Okay. Tell me about yours. How is it doing?
And
writing a book like that, writing a novel, how has it changed your view of what you do in real life?
I don't think it's had any substantive change. It was an ordeal. It took, as you know, 16 years to get the thing done. We had a good run. We sold, according to the last royalty statement, which is the end of April, 6,889 books for a hardcover. It's pretty good. They did a 15,000 run on the paperback. I guess I'll have to wait until January for the next royalty statement. But look, it was a great experience for me, and I think the second book I've worked on now, on and off, and I hope to get that out maybe in another year, and that will deal with issues, of course, about which I know very little, like judicial and political corruption.
Oh yes, right. And is that a novel or?
Yeah, novel. Yeah.
Really? Can you top what actually happened?
Can I top it?
Yeah.
Well, when you write fiction, you can do all sorts of different things.
Let me ask you one quick last question. Crime rates keep going down, perhaps a little bit more slowly in some cases, but what worries you most about the next big thing in crime?
Well, I don't think there's going to be anything that's going to spike up the crime. Certainly with our county, we have 30 alternative programs, so we can absorb any increase. What continues to scare the hell out of me is guns, because 65% of our murders are gun-related. Commissioner Kelly and I did a gun buyback on July 28th that was immensely successful. 697 guns in 6 hours in 6 churches in central Brooklyn. We're going to repeat that in September as well as October. If 10% of those guns were used to murder people, that would be 70 fewer bodies.
Charles J. Hynes, the Brooklyn District Attorney and author of Triple Homicide. Eric Ekholm, my New York Times colleague. Thanks to both of you for joining us.